So we'll begin with the work. So we are going to enter the work Arunachala Pancharatnam. As we saw, there are 5 verses, and then there is a 6th concluding verse. So we'll first begin with the chanting of the verses, and then we will go into the first verse, which is on the topic of grace. So we'll first have Aruna chant, and then we can also all chant together once.
So I shall just move the thing.
That's okay. I think
It will be easiest. Yeah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. करुणापूर्णसुधाब्दे कबलितघनविश्वरूपकिरणावल्या अरुणाचल परमात्मन् अरुणो भवचित्तकञ्जसुविकासाय त्वय्यरुणाचल सर्वं भूत्वा स्थित्वा प्रलीनमेतच्चित्रम् हृद्यहमित्यात्मतया नृत्यसि भोस्ते वदन्ति हृदयं नाम अहमिति कुत आयातीति अन्विष्यान्तः प्रविष्टयात्यमलधिया अवगम्य स्वं रूपम् शाम्यत्यरुणाचलत्वयि नदीवाब्धौ त्यक्त्वा विषयं बाह्यं रुद्धप्राणेन रुद्धमनसान्तस्त्वां ध्यायन् पश्यति योगी धीदितिमरुणाचलत्वयि महीयं ते त्वय्यर्पितमनसा त्वां पश्यन् सर्वं तवाकृतितया सततं भजते नन्यः प्रीत्या स जयत्यरुणाचलसुखे मग्नः श्रीमद्रमण महर्षेः दर्शनमरुणाचलस्य देवगिरा पञ्चकमार्या गीतौ रत्नं त्विदं पौपनिषदं हि அருள் நிறைவான அமுதக்கடலே விரி கதிரால் யாவும் விழுங்கும் அருண கிரி பரமான்மாவே கிளருள பூரன்றாய் விரிபரிதியாக விளங்கு சித்திரமாமித்தெல்லாம் செம்மலையே நின்பாலே உத்திதமாய் நின்றே ஒடுங்கிடுமால் நித்தியமும் நானென்றிதயம் நடித்திடுவையாலும் பேர் தானிதயம் என்றிடுவர் தாம் அகமுகமாரந்த அமலமதி தன்னால் அகமிதுதான் எங்கெழும் என்றாய்ந்தே அக உருவை நன்கறிந்து முன்னீர் நதி போலும் ஓயுமே உன் கண்ணருணாச்சலனே ஓர் வெளிவிடயம் விட்டு விளங்கும் அருணேசா வழி அடக்க நிற்கும் மனத்தால் உளமதனில் உன்னை தியானித்து யோகியொளி காணும் உன்னில் உயர் ஊறும் ஈதுன் உன்னிடத்தில் ஒப்புவித்த உள்ளத்தால் எப்பொழுதும் உன்னை கண்டெல்லாமும் உன்னுருவாய் அந்நியமில் அன்பு செய்யும் அன்னோன் அருணாச்சலா வெல்கும் இன்புருவாம் உன்னிலாழ்ந்தே அருணகிரி ரமணன் ஆரியத்திற்கண்ட அருமறையந்த கருத்தே ஆகும் அருணா சல பஞ்சகமணியை தன் தமிழ் வெண்பாவாய் உலகக் களித்தானு வந்து அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா.
So we'll go into the first verse now. So one of the things we can do is, because this work is very short and sweet, we can also chant the verse slowly, the first verse, and then we can take some turns and chant a few times so that the verse also gets imprinted. Then we'll go into the meaning. So just if we can repeat after me, I'll just slowly chant and then we can take turns to Karuna Purna Sudhabde Kabalita Ghana Vishwarupa Kiranavalya Arunachala Paramatman Aruno Bhava Chitta Kanja Suvikasaya. சொல்லுங்க நீங்க பாடுங்க இல்ல not the singing, we just wanted the words to go into, I mean many of you may know this but some of you don't know, that's why. So just repeat the words a couple of times, then we can go into the meaning. Ajay, you want to say? Karuna Purna Sudhabde Kabalita Ghana Vishwarupa Kiranavalya Arunachala Paramatman Aruno Bhava Chitta Kanja Suvikasaya. Nice. Anyone, like just a couple of more times we can do this so that the verse gets easily into the hearts. Sriram, you want to lead?
Karuna Purna Sudhabde
Karuna Purna Sudhabde Kabalita
Ghana
Kabalita Ghana Vishwarupa Kiranavalya
Arunachala
Paramatman Aruno Bhava
Chitta Kanja Suvikasaya.
சுதா நீங்க சொல்றீங்களா?
करुणा पूर्ण सुधाब्धे
கருணா பூர்ண சுதாப்தே
कबलित घन
கபலித கன
विश्वरूप
விஸ்வரூப
किरणावल्य
கிரணாவல்யா
अरुणाचल परमात्मन
அருணாச்சல பரமாத்மன்
अरुणो भव
அருணோ பவ
चित्तकंज
சித்தகஞ்ச
सुविकासाय
சுவிகாசாய. Anyone else wants to say? சொல்லுங்க.
करुणापूर्ण
கருணாபூர்ண
सुताब्दे
சுதாப்தே
कपिलतन
கபலித கன
विश्वरूप
விஸ்வரூப
किरणावल्या
கிரணாவல்யா
अरुणाचल
அருணாச்சல
परमात्मन
பரமாத்மன்
अरुणोभव
அருணோபவ
चित्तकंच
சித்தகஞ்ச
सुविकासाय
சுவிகாசாய. Thank you. So if we do this every session, when we do a verse, we'll just repeat a few times, so the verse will easily just get memorized automatically. We don't have to make any special effort there. So the verse, the first verse, also the Tamil verse, we heard it being chanted. We will not repeat it, but I'll just chant the verse. It says, Arul Niraivana Amudak Kadale Viri Kadiral Yavum Vilungum Aruna Giri Paramanmave Kilarulapunandrai Viri Paridiyaga Vilangu. So both of them have the same meaning as written here. Ocean of nectar, full of grace, engulfing the universe in thy splendor, O Arunachala, the Supreme Self. Be thou the sun that makes the lotus of the heart blossom. So the first word in this verse, in both Sanskrit and Tamil, is the word karuna, or in Tamil it's arul. Both means grace. So before we enter the Jnana, Vairagya, Bhakti, which comes in the second, third, fourth, and fifth verses, here Ramana Maharshi just first describes what brings us to all this, the grace that brings us into this inquiry, into this surrender. So grace, as we said, is a very mysterious thing, because first of all, what is grace is something we cannot define. But we can broadly say that that is grace which makes us step out of the ignorance of the ego. So normally speaking, when we go through our lives, if we look at everyone, it doesn't matter which country, which race, which gender, which color, everyone is conditioned by society to be identified with the ego. So there is a strong egoic identification that is there to some extent, perhaps genetically, but certainly strengthened by the society. Our education, our upbringing, everything makes everyone get firmly rooted in this idea of me and mine. So as we said in the introduction, we take ourselves to be the body and the mind, and we have a strong sense of identification that this is me. And it is so strong that we don't even ever question it. We think, if for many people, if we say, who am I? They say, of course I am who I am. I am the name, the form, the ideas, the experiences, the knowledge, all of it together is very obviously I am for everyone. And because of this strong identification with I am as all of this, we therefore have formed a small island around ourselves, which is separating us from everyone else, everything else. And then, as we said, because of that, there is desire, there is fear, there is attachment, there is comparison, there is envy, there is confusion, there is all these at the personal level. And not only that, because of this, we have a lot of conflict at interpersonal level. And then, even at international level, we have the same thing manifest as nationalism and religious wars and all the rest. So everything comes out of identification of the self with the body, with the mind, with ideas, ideologies, concepts, and all the rest. So, if that is actually our reality, then we are doomed. Because, by definition, if we are a separate, finite, small entity in this infinite world, and that's all we are, then we are always going to be living in the sense of fear, fear of death, fear of loss, and all the rest. So, the question as to whether what I take myself to be is in fact true at all, or whether there is something far beyond that I am not perceiving because of being caught in the prison of the ego. So, this very question rises only due to grace. So, when we are drawn to grace, when grace draws us rather, then it brings us to this question by making us see the finite nature and the suffering that comes out of the finite nature of our being. So the word in one of the words in Sanskrit for grace is anugraha. Anugraha means that which draws one close. So anugraha happens in many ways. So here Ramana Maharshi refers to Arunachala as the Karuna Purna Sudhabde, that is the ocean of nectar which is full of grace. The entire nature of Arunachala is said to be grace, the ocean of grace. And when we say ocean of grace, what is it that is shining forth as grace, as Arunachala? If we look at it, then at the very foundational level, it brings us back to the same question of what is our true nature, and by recognizing that, we come in contact with grace, but grace makes us recognize that as well. So the way we come to this, for example, when we ask the question, how do you come to this? It is very hard to answer this question except to say it is through grace, because it is grace that makes us step out of the identification that normally everyone takes oneself to be and ask, really, who am I? And it comes in very different ways. It can come through a very beautiful contact with a great sage. So, for many who have just simply seen the photograph of Ramana Maharshi, that has been the first contact with grace. Just seeing that eyes filled with compassion and love, that opens something up. Because one of the first things that comes up is, so Ramana Maharshi, if we take him as this example, he also lived as a human being. He lived hardly 100 years ago, and he lived among everyone. He had a lot of physical challenges and so on, and yet he lived as an ocean of compassion himself, just pure love embodied, and every encounter everyone had was filled with love and grace. So, the very recognition that a human being can live this way makes us question then. Right? So here the word towards the end it says, make the lotus of the heart blossom, chitta kanja suvikasaya. So when the heart blossoms, what will be the effect of it? What does it manifest as? For that we have one of the prime examples as Ramana Maharshi. So we see how he lived, how he was able to live with complete compassion without any sense of me, and never be bothered by anything, living in equanimity at all times, no matter whether it was a very joyful situation or a very sad situation, no matter whether it was opulence or complete lack, it didn't affect him at all. He was able to live with complete equanimity. So, when we see that equanimity, the wealth that he had within, that is a direct manifestation of grace. So, we see that this is possible for a human being to live. So, one of the things we tend to do is we tend to make such a being as somehow totally separate from us, as if we can only worship him. But what Ramana Maharshi always pointed out is, it is your nature too. It is every one of ours nature too, to manifest that grace within, and thereby live in this love, compassion, and true peace without. So, contact with Ramana Maharshi or with the teaching is grace. And when we say here Arunachala is the ocean of grace, Arunachala comes to us through Ramana Maharshi. So, as we already saw, Ramana Maharshi revealed the inner truth of Arunachala as the unmoving stillness of pure wisdom. So, what is this unmoving stillness of pure wisdom? Inquiring into that is the very manifestation of grace itself. Because when we see Ramana, when we see his life, when we see his teachings, we see the possibility of what it is when a heart blossoms fully and lives as this perfect human flower. And what makes this possible is complete non-identification with the ego. So the ego is what, as we saw already, is the root of all pettiness. Every single pettiness at the local or the global level comes out of the ego. This is something that everyone can easily understand, acknowledge. But the possibility that one can live free of the ego is grace. And that is what gives us the contact with grace through giving us this possibility. So every one of us here can actually live free of the false identification with the ego through this teaching, through this pointer, and that is the true grace, the ocean of nectar that is available for us. So the ocean of nectar of Arunachala is not something that is a physical mountain alone. The physical mountain is only a manifestation of the inner principle which is available here and now for every one of us. And that inner principle is the nature of pure wisdom that is in our heart. So then the question is, what is this wisdom and how do we come in direct contact with it? So for that to happen, many times what we also find is we need to be pulled out of the wrong identifications, the wrong attachments with the ego. So many times that's why grace also operates through tremendous challenges and obstacles that comes in our way. So on the one hand, grace comes in the form of Arunachala, in the form of Ramana, in the form of Bhagavatam, so many beautiful words that are there that give us the possibility of what a human life can be. We can live free of the ego. That possibility, first of all, has to resonate with us. For the possibility to resonate with us itself is grace, because many people would not even consider it a possibility. They are so strongly identified with the ego as me that this possibility of living free of the ego does not even arise. So that for that to arise is grace. And that happens many times through intense challenges, obstacles, suffering as well. So grace also manifests on the other side, on the one side as this tremendous beauty of the possibility, and on the other side as the tremendous challenges that make us reveal or reveals to us rather the limited nature of what we take ourselves to be. So there are so many examples of this given in many instances. We always find that what we consider to be great challenges, great obstacles are actually the greatest aids for us to step into grace. So one thing that happened in the extreme example of Ramana Maharshi, as we saw, is the death experience. Right? So death experience is in fact the most challenging thing for most people, because when we have it is in fact said that every fear is rooted in the fear of death. So when fear of death actually manifests that I'm going to die this moment, that is the highest form of grace actually that came to Ramana Maharshi, because he was able to awaken out of that fear of death. But this death can come in different ways as well. It can be the death of some relation of ours, it can be the death of some possession, it can be the death of some possession. So many things can go away, taken away, and when they are taken away, then that results in us looking within. So, for example, there is a nice story in Bhagavatam. Uh, Many would have heard of this. There is a story of Dhruva. So, Dhruva was this young boy, and he had a father called Uttanapada. And this Dhruva was the son of Uttanapada. Two wives actually. One was Suniti, one was Suruchi. Suniti's son was Dhruva, and Suruchi had a son called Uttama. So the story given by Bhagavatam, which is very beautiful and highly symbolic, because this, if we look at it as to how it happens in our own lives. So what happens here is Uttanapada, being the king, the son Dhruva wants to be with the father. So he goes to his father and goes to sit on his lap. But his stepmother Suruchi, she pulls him away and she throws him out. She says, "You do not deserve to be with your father because you are not my son. My son alone can sit with the king." And the names are also very symbolic. See, Suniti means the one who follows dharma. Suruchi means the one who simply follows what is tasteful, what is gratifying. So many names in Bhagavatam have a very beautiful inner meaning. So normally when we are the Uttanapada and we ignore Niti and we go after Ruchi. That's what he did. He ignored the first wife Suniti, who represents living according to Dharma, and he went after simply sense gratification, which is Suruchi. And therefore, son of Dhruva, which is was a son of Suniti, that is Dhruva, he represents the possibility of awakening to devotion. But this son Dhruva was thrown aside by Suruchi. So when that happens, he goes to Suniti, his mother, and he says, "Oh mother, this stepmother of mine threw me away, and I am very upset." And Suniti tells him, "Don't be upset. Consider it a favor done by her, because our only true father is God alone. So go and pray to God, and you will be fine." So he takes this word of his mother and he goes to the forest, and there he meets Narada. Narada gives him a mantra, and because of that mantra, which is the famous Dwadashakshara mantra, because of that he chants, and then he realizes the truth of Bhagavan, and then he realizes the truth that what makes him function, what he was looking for as God, is that which makes him function at every level. When we are looking for God, we are making God to be an external object, and we are saying that I have to find God as the creator of the universe, or as the controller, or as the destroyer, whatever term we may use. But the reality is that the very energy that permeates the body is coming forth from the same source. So Dhruva realizes this, and he says a very beautiful prayer. In fact, he says, it's a very often quoted prayer. Dhruva says, "Yontaf pravishya mama vacham imam prasuptam sanjeevayat akhila shaktidara swadhamna anyamscha hasta charana shravanatvagaadin pranan namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam." Such a beautiful prayer. He says, "Yo antaf pravishya mama vacham imam prasuptam." He says, the one who has entered me and makes me speak with infinite powers. Sanjeeva yat akhila shaktidara swadhamna. He has got infinite powers. And anyamscha hasta charana shravana tvagadin. He makes my limbs move. He makes my feet move. He makes my hearing happen. He makes my very life energy manifest. Pranan. Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam. He says, that Bhagavan I offer my obeisance to. So here, there's two things that comes out with this beautiful story. One is how grace for Dhruva came in the form of Suruchi, the stepmother. So if the stepmother hadn't thrown him off the father's lap, he would have never gone looking for God. So the first thing to recognize here is, when we talk of grace, we have to recognize that every challenge we face in life is in fact the best form of grace. Every obstacle is the best form of grace. When we talk of grace, we normally look at only that which is very pleasant, very beautiful, but at the same time, that which is very hard, very difficult, very challenging is a direct manifestation of grace in our lives. In fact, if you look at it, everyone, more often than not, comes to this because of a big challenge like this. As Ramana Maharshi himself showed, it was the death experience that brought him to the realization instantly. So that's why in Bhagavatam again, Krishna in a different verse says, "The one upon whom I bestow my grace, I take everything away." He says, "Yasyaham anugrahanami harishyet dhanam shanai." So when we say grace, he says, I take away everything, not I give anything, because The problem we have is not to get anything new, but to lose the false identification. That is the real essence of this whole inquiry. Right? So, what Dhruva says in his prayer is the realization that everything that functions within me is happening through your power. The speech, the listening, the movement, the energy, the prana, everything happens because of the power of Bhagavan. We take ourselves to be the owner and the proprietor of all the faculties we have. So that is the fundamental problem with the ego. So what Dhruva reveals, in addition to the grace that Dhruva got in the form of a challenge, in the form of a great calamity, for a little child to be thrown away like that by his stepmother and driven to the forest, but that revealed to him the truth. And the truth that was revealed was that God is not an external entity, but the very life energy that makes our being function at all levels. So, if you look at that carefully now, which connects us to the very question of self inquiry, when we consider ourselves to be the body, the mind, the intellect, the energy, and all of it, if we look at everything carefully, we recognize that the body is a collection of food, collection of various processes that is coming together, and we see the body functioning on its own. It is not that any process in the body is in my control. The breathing, the digestion, the blood circulation, everything in the body right now, as we are sitting here, everything is happening in the body perfectly on its own. We consider this to be my body, but in reality, the body doesn't ever say it's me. The body simply functions with its own intelligence here and now. So, this is the very first thing to observe, is that the body, the physical body that is, does not have a sense of self at all, but it simply functions every moment with its own intelligence. The same with the prana, the energy in the body. So, as Dhruva refers to the prana, the energy in the body, which makes all the senses also function. When we say seeing, for example, we say I see. But in reality, do I see or seeing happens? So seeing happens. When I'm looking at something, I can use the word I as a pronoun, but in reality, the very process of vision happens on its own automatically. There is nobody willing for vision to happen. I do not, through the limited intellect, one can never even understand how vision happens. It just happens spontaneously, perfectly. Same is true with hearing. Same is true with movements of the limbs. So that's why he says, Hasta Charana Shravana Tvagadi. Every limb, every faculty we have functions spontaneously by an intelligence. So that intelligence that makes us function at the physical level itself is what is called the divine energy. Because there is no separate owner of this energy to say it is me making the eye see, it is me making the ears hear, it is me making the limbs move. There is no me. Everything happens at the energy level. Then we look at thought. We think I am thinking thoughts. But in reality, if we look at it, thoughts are simply a product of knowledge, memory, and experience that has been there in the memory, in the brain. So at every moment, we are only capable of thinking the thoughts that the brain has been exposed to. And that happens through the environment, through the conditioning around us, and so on. So, in reality, can we then truly say that any thought belongs to me? Can I say that it is my thought? Because every thought is come through the environment around us, the conditioning, the culture we have been raised in, the family we are born into. All these contribute to every single thought we have. So there is no individual owner to say that this is my thought. So that's why there in this verse, Dhruva says, every faculty, every capacity, every ability is all coming forth from Bhagavan. And to that Bhagavan I offer my obeisance. So when we recognize this, that the very essence of our being, which we consider, even if we take it to be the body, the mind, the intellect, and so on, none of this can be said to be mine. So, if we recognize this and therefore we do not identify with anything, then what are we? Normally, we have a sense of self because of these faculties and these capacities and these things we do. So we think, or we experience something, or we know something, or we talk, or we move, or we act, and because of all this we feel we exist. But if we recognize that all of this happens with no sense of me in it, in reality every action happens through the divine energy that permeates the body. Every faculty functions through the divine energy that permeates the body. If you recognize this, then what remains as me? Everything that I take myself to be is found to be only a limited, accumulated memory or experience or some knowledge I have that I take to be myself. When I recognize that all of this has no sense of self in it because it is all happening on its own, and I do not have any claim to say this is me. When we recognize that, then what remains as me? So, this is the question which we will go further and further into. But for us to recognize this, we have to first be free of this strong identification with all these faculties, all these capacities, ability to think, ability to act, and all the rest. But what we normally end up doing is we are so caught up in it, and our identity is so invested in it that we are not even looking at the fact that none of this is me. And sometimes that's why the more intense the grace is, the more clear it is to remove all these false conceptions. It actually reminds me of another very powerful story in Bhagavatam. Uh, so we can see how grace functions. To take an extreme example, there is the story of a king called Chitraketu. It's a very powerful case of what's called as fierce grace. So when we talk of grace, again, grace can be very fierce. For us to recognize this is very important, because then we will not condemn any situation, but we'll actually be grateful for any situation. No matter any challenge comes, we can be grateful for it if we recognize that every situation brings forth grace. So Chitraketu's story is very beautiful, because what happens with Chitraketu is he is this king who is very powerful. He rules with great might, great opulence, but he has only one problem, which is that he doesn't have a son. And as normally happens in these cases, he is extremely depressed, because as a king, he feels that his dynasty is going to end. So no matter how much opulence he has, how much power he has, the expansive kingdom he has, everything he has, he is not happy. So he is very morose about it and generally depressed. So this we see, by the way, in many cases where we may have everything that we can ask for, but the one thing we don't have is what we focus on, whatever it might be. And we say, oh, things are bad. We don't feel grateful for all that we have, but the one thing we don't have, we focus on. So that's what everyone does. That's right there, very typical. And that's what this king also did. So then a great sage comes. His name is Angira. He comes to his kingdom. And when Angira comes to his kingdom, Angira says, how are you doing? And he can clearly see that this Chitraketu is not very happy. So he says, what is making you very unhappy? And Chitraketu immediately blurts out saying, oh sage, I have everything, but I don't have a son. I really need a son in order to complete my life. So the sage Angira tells him, is that what you really want? He says, yeah, that's what I really want. So the sage says, I can grant you a son, but he will give you happiness and misery. He says, it's okay, I need this. So again, when we need something so badly, we don't recognize whether it is actually for our good or not. We just want it so badly that we just do whatever it takes to take it without realizing. So that's exactly what Chitraketu does. He says, I want it so badly. So Angira says, okay, fine, so be it. So as it's said symbolically, he gives him a portion and he says, give it to your one of, whichever. He has many wives, by the way. So this Chitraketu, that's why he had a very opulent life in every way, but he just did not have this one thing. So when he was given this portion, the sage said, you can give it to any one wife and she will conceive. So he gave it to his dear wife, one of them, and she immediately, as expected, conceived. So instantly, the whole kingdom broke into great celebration. Everyone was happy. Chitraketu started giving gifts away, knowing that his wife has conceived, and the whole kingdom started celebrating. And then, sure enough, the baby was born. And when the baby was born, it's a son. There was so much happiness. Okay, our next king is born, and everyone was celebrating. There was such festivities in the city, in the capital, and so on. And this queen who gave birth was especially celebrated. But as always happens, when one is identified with the ego, what is great happiness to one becomes misery to another. So because this queen was so celebrated, all the other queens became very jealous. So he had many wives, as we said. All the other queens became so jealous of this queen, and there was this intense jealousy that was building over time. 1 year went by, 2 years went by. By 2 years, when this baby was still a toddler, there was such celebration of this wife, and the king himself was so attached to this wife because of this, that the other wives were ignored so badly that these wives decided to do the most devious thing. They silently poisoned the child. So that little baby, 2-year-old baby, was poisoned, and the baby was administered this poison by their own stepmothers. So then this wife of Chitraketu goes into this her child's place, and there is a caretaker, and the caretaker comes back suddenly saying the child is not responding, and then they go and they find that the eyes are popped out and the baby has passed away. And immediately there is intense misery. What was such great celebration turned into the most intense grief for the wife first, and then the news reaches Chitraketu, and Chitraketu could not even speak. He was so attached to this child that it gave such misery, such suffering for him. So right there we see how when one is so attached to something, it becomes the sage also warned it. He said it will be your source of great happiness and great misery. And that's exactly what happened. That great misery came because of this child that he was so attached to. And when he was in such a dark state, Angira came back again. The great sage Angira, he came now with Narada, it is said. And at that time, they tell him, they say that you were so attached to something, and we told you that if you get this, it will also bring intense suffering. You didn't care for it, you asked for it, and now you are having this. And now they tell him a beautiful instruction. They say that recognize that everything that comes will be taken away. In your case, it was taken away so quickly, and it is giving you such intense grief. But you realize that the only thing that cannot be taken away from you is your very connection to the divine, which is in your heart. Everything that comes outside, whether it is be your son in this case or this kingdom, your wealth, everything will be taken away. The only thing that cannot be taken away is that which is essential to your own nature. Find out what it is. So when this instruction is given at this state to Chitraketu, he listens. He is able to listen because he realizes the truth of what was said. It is one thing to say theoretically that there is impermanence in the world, but he saw this impermanence directly, and because of that, he instantly turned to inquire within, to meditate and to realize God. So this is a case of what is called as fierce grace. For him, grace came in the beginning in a very gentle form, in the form of sage Angira. And Angira told him, he in fact tells him, when I first came, I was ready to give you this instruction, but you didn't have any space to listen. All you wanted was one thing, which was you wanted a child. Because you wanted it, I gave you. And now that has brought you all this suffering. Now you are listening. And therefore, now I tell you what I was planning to tell you when the first time I came. So when we see this story, what it reveals to us is grace is such a mysterious thing that how it comes to us, when it comes to us, in what form it comes to us, we can never say. But it can come to us in the most unexpected forms. And the more we are ready to receive it, the less suffering we go through. So in the case of Chitraketu, because he was not ready to receive it when it came in the first time, he had to go through this intense suffering in order to be ready to receive it. So eventually it comes for everyone, because eventually everyone has to go through loss, go through death, and if not in this lifetime, they get some at some point. But the important lesson here is that there are two things. One is every moment grace is available to us if we look for it by not getting identified with our bodily conception, with all the impermanent things on earth. But if we don't, then grace, the same grace comes to us in a very fierce form, as it came for Chitraketu. It comes in an extremely fierce form, which is hard to handle, but it opens us up anyway. So it's really up to us. Are we perceiving the grace that's available here and now? Because grace is available at all times. That's why here it says Karuna Purna Sudhabde, ocean of nectar. It is ocean that is available here and now. We can be near an ocean and we can still not want to step into it because of our own inhibitions. But the ocean is right here. So similarly, this teaching is right here available to us now. So when we say grace, grace is not something that comes from somewhere and it will descend upon us one day. We may think like that, but in reality, grace is available here and now every moment if we only open our eyes to it. It is very similar to how we could be in the brightest day with sun shining, but if we close our eyes and if we keep asking for sunlight, we will keep asking for sunlight. But the sunlight is shining all around us. All we need to do is open our eyes. So similarly, here also it says the nectar of ocean is all around us. And we just have to open our eyes to perceive it. And if we are ready to open our eyes and perceive it, it's available. And when we do that, then we recognize the falsity of all the attachments. If we are attached as Chitraketu was, then it will be snatched away. That is the reality of the world. We all know this. In fact, there is a small question and answer in Mahabharata that many may know, where Yudhishthira is asked what is the most surprising thing in the world. Yaksha Prashna. And Yudhishthira says, the most surprising thing in the world is everyone sees others die, but they think they'll never die. So that's really how it is. For everyone makes plans forever. It's one thing to take care of one's needs and all the rest, but then people make plans as if they're never going to die when they see this happening all around. So this attachment that makes us not perceive the truth that is right in front of our eyes is ignorance. The opposite of it that makes us perceive the truth is grace. That's all. So when we have, and both of them are available all the time actually. Both ignorance and grace are available here and now. If we choose to remain ignorant, we remain ignorant. If we open our eyes to grace, we then recognize the grace that's available here and now. And when we recognize the grace here and now, then what it does is it removes all attachments to the world. So that's why it says Kabalita Ghana Vishwarupa Kiranavalya. It swallows the whole world. It doesn't mean that the world disappears. What it means is that the attachment to the world goes away. We do not feel attached to the world because we recognize that the whole universe is the divine. So here the word Vishwarupa is used, which is interesting because as we know, in the Gita, Krishna gives the Vishwarupa. Vishwarupa is the form that Krishna reveals to show that the whole universe is divine, is only his form. So when we look at the universe, we look upon the universe as some fixed material entity and we as a finite aspect of it and here to enjoy the universe. But in reality, the entire universe is one unit which is interconnected and functioning and which is the expression of the divine. And if we see this carefully again, this is all part of self-inquiry because the universe is part of ourself. Because all the elements that make up our body is what makes up the universe. There is no place where the elements stop, and or rather, there is no place where the universe stops and we begin. We are a continuous portion of the universe. It is like how we have different, in the physical body, we have different parts of the body. We have eyes and ears and nose and so on. Everything forms one integral unit. So, similarly, all of us form one integral unit, which is the whole universe. Everyone is an integral part of the universe. So, everyone, everything affects each other in some subtle form. We all walk on the same soil, have the same water, air, fire, and space. And the mind is again shared by all of us. As we said, all thoughts are in the realm of everyone's access. We see that thoughts are again part of the environment, part of society. There is no one who can claim ownership that this is my thought. So everything that is there at the physical and the subtle level as the universe is one divine expression. That is the Vishwarupa. And that Vishwarupa, here it says, that's why Kabalita Ghana Vishwarupa Kiranavalya. That is the ocean of grace swallows this Vishwarupa. That is to say, we have this false attachment that the world is separate and we are separate and we are this limited entity and we are here to maximize our happiness or whatever form in which we define success and so on. But when we recognize that we are one integral unit, the whole world is one integral unit, and this integral unit is Vishwarupa, and that is all an expression of the divine energy. And that divine energy alone exists, and that's what manifests as this world. When we recognize this, that is grace. When we instead think that I am separate, others are separate, and the world is meant for my enjoyment and sense gratification, and living without any conception of the impermanence of this idea, and being always susceptible to suffering, that is ignorance. When we recognize that that way is ignorance, and to be free of that and to look within and to be free of the identification with the body as me, with the mind as me, with the thoughts and feelings and everything as me, is to awaken to grace. And when that happens, the heart blossoms. So he says, Chitta Kanja Suvikasaya, or in Tamil it says, Kilar Ulappu Nandrai. So Ulappu means the flower of the heart, same thing. And the flower of the heart blossoms when grace comes to us. And that grace shining is called Arunachala Paramatman. So Arunachala Paramatman is the unmoving stillness that is ever present, from which comes forth the world, in which the world abides, into which the world subsides, and which alone remains when we remove all false identification. So to recognize that as our true essence and not the body and the mind is for the heart to blossom. So that is the pointer of the first verse. The first verse still does not, we have not gone into the actual self-inquiry in terms of what is the true nature of our being when we are stripped of all these false identities. But we can at least see that the very opening of this possibility makes our heart blossom. We are able to then come into the field of grace where we are not caught in this limited conception anymore. We are ready to look within. We are ready to question what we have taken ourselves to be so far. And we are able to thereby transcend the false ego, the false identification. And when that happens, the heart blossoms, and that is what we call as grace. And that grace awakens, as we said, in many ways. So, the most important thing for us to therefore recognize is that we need not ask for grace, we just have to recognize the grace that's available here and now. And the more we recognize it, the more it's available to us. But if we don't recognize it, it comes in more and more fierce forms. It comes gently, but if we don't recognize it, it comes more fiercely, then it comes more fiercely. So grace is always available, but it's just how it manifests depends on how we take it. So if we are open to it, then we are able to recognize it and we are able to abide in it. So when we get together here in Satsang too, that is the greatest form of grace for us to just sit together, not be engaged in any other frivolous discussion, but to look into this direct pointer, not take the body and the mind and the limited faculties we have to be me, see that they are all happening, operating by the divine energy. And when we sit in silence and not identify with anything as me, when any thought rises, when we recognize the thought is rising on its own and it has got its own energy, I don't have to chase it, I don't have to identify with it as the thinker of the thought. And when I don't do that, then the thought has no momentum to go forward. Thought is sustained by our identification as the thinker of the thought. When I don't identify with thought, and I don't identify with rising reactions, feelings, and I simply sit still, not identified with anything, and therefore I remain absolutely as nothing, then what is present is that which cannot be captured in words, is the fullness of our very being. So to come in contact with that is to remove all false ideas so that the truth can shine forth. And that removal of false ideas comes through grace. So when we say grace, grace is the whole thing, because if we can actually connect with it, it's all that is needed is to recognize the falsity of all identifications, let go of it, and simply sit in the very presence of our being, which is free of all movements. We sit in complete silence and there is not any movement inwardly, then what remains cannot be verbalized. So we all may have heard the expression Chumayire said by Ramana Maharshi, be still. Be still is exactly this. It's not about or it's not about many other misconceptions perhaps. It is about not identifying with anything that rises as me. When we don't identify with anything that rises as me, and thereby there is no movement within, then what remains is the stillness of being. It's like if we have a cup of water, as long as there is something in the cup, we identify with what's in the cup. There is a little water or a little tea or little this. But when the cup is completely empty, then the cup is actually full of space. the fullness of the space in the cup is ignored because of the presence of some little thing in the cup. So that's why many times there is even debates around emptiness and fullness. In reality, they are one and the same. Being empty of thoughts, identifications, movements, empties the content of the mind, and when the mind is emptied, what remains is the fullness of being. So when we sit in meditation, we are not trying to acquire anything new, we are not trying to gain any experience, we are not trying to understand anything. We are only completely remaining still, emptying whatever rises through non-identification. And when we remain without identifying with anything, what then remains as the stillness is our being. So that which we call Arunachala Paramatman here, that which is called as Brahman, that which is called as Bhagavan, so many names are given for that which cannot be named, but that which can be only indicated through all these names, but that which can really be only directly recognized by the abidance as the space of being. So that's why in Ulladu Narpadu, the very first verse he says, Ullatte Ullade Ullal Unarvaye. He says to know it is to be it. We cannot know Brahman or Arunachala Paramatman through knowledge, through ideation, through understanding, but through letting go of everything. When we let go through understanding that everything we have identified with is false, then what remains when the false identifications all go away, all stripped out, is the very ground of being, which is Paramatman, which is Bhagavan. So the whole purpose of meditation and this retreat or anywhere is to empty the mind and to remain in that stillness. We are normally always agitated because we are thinking about something. There is some thought about something, some desire to understand something. Even when we come to this, the mind wants to understand, the mind wants to conceptualize, know. But the Upanishads, for example, point out, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. It says the mind and words come back empty-handed. So one can never conceptualize it through the mind, one can never conceptualize through understanding. When we recognize that, that is real understanding. And then we remain free of this attempt to figure anything out, but completely let go and surrender. So that's why surrender is non-different from abidance as our true being. Because when we surrender all false identifications, what remains is our true being. So when we sit in meditation, we are not doing anything positive, so to speak. We are only letting go. It is an emptying process, as it said, neti, neti. When we let go of everything that rises as not me, and therefore do not chase it, do not identify with it. And then when there is absolutely nothing rises, when there is a stillness within, then that stillness continues even when we speak. Speaking can happen, listening can happen, activities can go on, but there is nobody identifying as the speaker, the listener, the thinker, the doer. There is just the ground of presence in which activities happen. In other words, there is no me even now for all of us. And when we recognize this, then we act every moment in meditation. So, meditation is to come to this recognition in silence and then carry it through actions too. So, that what Krishna says in the Gita, where he says, Ahankara vimudhatma karta ahamiti manyate. Only ignorance makes us think I am the doer. When we recognize that I am not the doer, then actions continue, but there is no doer thereof. And that recognition comes through stillness. So when we sit in silence, we still, not through any effort, but through letting go of all mental activities that come up, by seeing clearly that it is not me. Any thought that comes about anything, whether it's frivolous or whether it's serious, recognize that that thought is coming from the ground of memory and knowledge, which has its own energy, and it doesn't have to be identified with as me. And when we don't identify with it, it falls in its right place. For instance, of course, when there is a need to attend to a thought, it has to be attended. But our problem is we are attending to thoughts which have no need to be attended to. So when we recognize this through this clarity, the thoughts have their own energy, they come up, and the energy needed to attend to them is also available when it's necessary. And right now, when I'm sitting in silence, I don't need to attend to any thought, because no thought is me. There is no me in any thought, no thought is mine. And when we recognize this, and we therefore sit in the silent presence where thoughts naturally cease, then what remains is the direct, non-verbal perception of Arunachala Paramatman, and that flowers the heart to blossom. So that's the whole pointer of this verse. And in every verse, we'll go deeper and deeper into the same pointer to recognize that Arunachala, or whatever name we call, is the only truth that's available here and now as the ground of being, as that which is simply the very existence that is there when there is no thought movement. That's why it is called as Sat simply. Sat also means existence. When we say Sat Chit Ananda, Sat means existence. So in other ways, it's also, that's why called Asti Bhati Priyam. So Asti means that which exists. Bhati means it shines on its own. And Priyam means it's love itself. So that very sense of existence, what is there when we do not think? When we have no thoughts whatsoever, when there is complete stillness, what is there is our very existence. And that existence is Arunachala Paramatman. And that is the blossoming of our heart. Being alert and awake, that's why the Upanishads say, right? Uttishta Jagrata, they say. That's what it means. Arise and awake. So when we are very alert, see, thought happens only through inattention. When we are not attentive, then we identify as the subject of the thought. So when we are, every time a thought comes up, there is the thinker of the thought and the thought. The thinker is an image built up by mind. So for example, let's say I'm thinking about, take anything, let's say some thought about the job comes, one is working. Then the image of the employee is coming along with the thought of the job or anything related to the job. And the image is also a thought, which is what we don't realize. So the thinker is also a thought. It is not that there is thinker and there is thought and the thinker is thinking on thought. It is just two thoughts. The thinker is the thought. But because we identify with the thinker as me, we create a separation and then we act on the thought. We say this is a good thought, it's a bad thought, I like this thought, I don't like this thought, I have to control it, I have to suppress it, I have to go after it, all of this. Then different forms of so-called meditation talk about all of this. But the direct pointer of self-inquiry is to recognize that you are not the thinker. So when we recognize that I am not the thinker is itself a thought. It's an image built by memory over time that says I am XYZ. And that XYZ is what wants to think. So the XYZ that wants to think is itself a thought. And when I recognize that with full attention, then I dissociate from both the thought and the thinker. And then there is nobody to run behind the thought or suppress the thought or do anything with it. All that remains is just the peace. So that's being awake, as you said, very awake and alert. But when you are not awake, then the momentum of the thought will drag you into the identification with the thinker. And then you are running behind the thought. And then you have, after a while, you say, no, I have to control this thought. All of this comes from the standpoint of a subject of the thinker of the thought. The subject-object division causes us to get caught in this fragmentation, in this division. When we are not identified as the subject, then we remain as the true subject, which is the presence in which the subject and object come and go. And that requires us to be awake and alert.
And that is not even the subject. Because when there is no object.
Exactly. That is right.
That's the question.
There is no subject. That's exactly right.
Simple
Presence. That's well put.
The human nature is we are always addicted to our own thoughts.
Yes.
We often carried away by our own thoughts.
Yes.
But we don't often pay attention to where the thought comes from.
Yeah.
So that's where I think I have at least trouble in looking at sometimes carried away by the thoughts.
See, where the thought comes from is important, but what's more important is who's the thinker of the thought, which is actually the same, effectively speaking, because the thought comes from only because of identification with the image that's there in the mind, which generates the thought. See, for example, if I'm concerned about, for me to think about something, I have to be identified with something concerning that. It's amazing how, for example, many times people are in a job, they are constantly thinking about it, and then one day something happens and then they just, either they get fired or they get laid off, or instantly all those thoughts go away, right? So the reason you have the thought is because you've identified, and that has become so core identity of yours. And then it can pop one day like that, right? But in reality, even when those thoughts are there, the direct recognition is to see that, let's say I have a job, there is necessity to think about the job, that is part of the work, but not to be identified with it as the self. So when that activity goes on, thought operates necessary to function in the job, but to not carry that as me gives me that freedom to be attentive, and then even the work happens properly, because when it needs to be attended to, it happens. But otherwise I get obsessive about it and keep thinking about it and all the rest, right? And the same is true with any attachment. If I'm attached to a particular relationship, then I keep thinking about it. Or if I'm attached to a particular ideology, in the extreme cases, that's why people engage in even extreme acts of violence and so on, because it becomes a ghost that takes possession of the living organism. So when we are very alert and awake, we recognize that it is just an image that is built over time, that has seeped into our consciousness. And then we can very clearly see which is necessary and which is not. If I'm working in a job and I'm working in the job, it's necessary to do what's needed. But I don't have to sit and think about some global war or something, because that's not my problem, right? So we are constantly engaged in thinking, because the main problem we have is that, as someone said, if we don't have a problem, we want to create a problem, because we don't feel like we exist without a problem. If you are fully aware of that too, right? So let's say you're listening to something and your mind is going to something else. If you are aware of that, then you're automatically going to come back. You don't have to divide yourself to say this is, see, the attention can be full then. The attention is holistic, then as you say, naturally the right thought gets put in the right place. As I always say, that's art. Art means putting things in the right place. So when things get put in the right place, what needs to be attended to gets attended to, and things that need to be dropped get dropped. And when I'm sitting in meditation, especially, as Shanti said, there is nothing to think then. You just remain silent. And when that silence is there, and you're fully awake, then there is such peace, right? That peace that is felt when there is complete alert presence is direct darshan of Bhagavan. That is what it is. So when we say Arunachala Paramatman, in another verse he says, Hridaya Kuhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram Hi Aham Aham Iti Sakshad Atma Rupena Bhati. He says that which shines in the heart as I, that very presence, that peace, is Brahman. And so that is what is our true nature.